and thanks for having us here today. We'll jump straight into it. We're a little pressed on time, and we've got a very, very heavy and interesting topic to discuss. So by now, everybody joining today is quite familiar with the concept of open banking, the benefits, the pitfalls, you name it. In Canada, at least, the discussion has been going on for a few years now, and everybody's waiting with bated breath to see what route the country takes. However, once we move past this conceptual phase, it's important to start thinking about the practical considerations that underpin the foundations of open banking. And that's why today we'll focus on security as it pertains to open banking, a hot topic not only in the context of open banking, but more broadly, given the constant newsfeed reminders of data leaks and ransomware attacks, which seem to come out almost every week. So to help me today, we've got an all-star cast of practitioners with deep expertise in the field. Thank you, Brian, for the introduction. I'm assuming you're all familiar with them as you have access to the internet and you can look them up. So with that, I'm going to jump straight into the questions, and hopefully we'll save a bit of time, depending on how the conversation goes, to take some questions at the end. But we've got a lot of good content that we can go through. So without further ado, gentlemen, first question, let's jump straight into it. I think it's important that we level set the conversation to make sure that we'll get off on the right foot. And since we have different iterations of open banking globally, I think the best is to pitch it to you and ask, what's your definition of the concept? What does open banking mean to you? Which one of you wants to get us started?
I can start. I don't mind. Thanks, Abraham. Classic question. I know we're pressed for time, so I'll keep it brief. A lot of people like to equate open banking definitions with this notion of data ownership, and yep, that's sort of the open part. But it's also a little abstract. So I like to say that really open banking at the end of the day is about development of a common standard, a common, open, shared standard that no one owns, that anyone can use for the secure exchange of financial data. And it doesn't matter how you get there, whether it's a regulatory route or a market-driven route, this notion of a common, open, shared standard is what binds all open banking definitions together.
Okay, great. Great way to get started, Eyal. One of the Davids.
I would completely agree with that concept. I think that sharing the data, particularly finance data, financial data, and banking data is the key here. So not only making sure that the user is who he says he is, but also how you transport the data from the banking premises to whoever is handling the data on behalf of the user. So that's the key. I think that you nailed it there.
Okay, good point. David Lee, you want to take
all right, yeah, I'll make mine. I'll make mine super short and really quick. I always look at things from just kind of a different viewpoint, right? So I agree with everything, right? It's a common standard to share financial data, but specifically driven to make sure I really focus on the open part, right? So that it's allowed for everybody. We've taken a lot of things with the banks and financials and kind of we use this kind of old rigid model, and a lot of people just didn't have access to that. And so now it's like, how I visualize it is something as simple as we all go out to dinner, right? And the bill comes, and I'm a wine drinker, so you guys are like, hey, look, we're gonna pay for the food, but let's add more on David's bill. But look, we all simply just grab our phones and we can just say, okay, here it is, and let me send $50 to Eyal. Let me send $30 to David, whatever, and that's it. It's simple. It's done. Like, we did it. It wasn't some big thing. Give me your this, give me your that. It's truly saying, look, what we want to be able to do is use these financial data to make a transaction, to make an action, and we can do it however we can. So.
Yep. I got to echo David's simplicity there. I couldn't agree more. In many ways, what open banking is trying to bring is something that should be very obvious and should be very easy, but for some reason is not.
Okay. So Eyal and David, then it doesn't matter how we define it, so long as it works, so long as it makes our life easier, just like that example we had, right? Excellent.
And does it in a secure way that allows as many people to participate. And an interesting aspect that David touched on is the difference between having an open standard that no one owns, which is enormously important, that anyone can adopt, but ensuring open access to all the participants in the ecosystem. Well, that's really the next step, and it's where some of the nuance comes into play.
Okay, I really want to focus in on that. Actually, I love your answer because I'm going to segue it to the next question. So in this context, and how do we maintain security in the flow of data between requesters and consumers?
Oh, come on, WebEx.
Not just me.
Last
Oh, well, let's
one.
just answer. Yeah, there we
Do we allow the market to develop? And gentlemen, feel free to disagree with one another. It makes it even more interesting. Whoever wants to get us going.
I took the last one.
Yeah. So okay. I think so. On my end, sorry, it cut out just a little bit. So I think I missed the crux of the question, Abraham. Can you repeat it real quick?
Yeah, sure. So is it preferable to have a top-down approach where the government steps in to regulate, or do we let the industry just run it to determine what the standards are?
Ooh, okay. I'm gonna dive in, gentlemen, and take this one, right? So I'm going to say the typical consultant answer, and it's neither. Here's the thing, right? And I'll be very kind of blunt with this. So it can't be top down because it's not going to be. I don't feel like if it's top down, like coming from a government of regulation, right? It's not going to be representative of everybody that needs to kind of take a part of it, right? And usually when top down regulations come, they're so heavy that what happens? It's only the most kind of successful, the ones that can afford to go and put in the process to do it, end up implementing that. We've seen that with regulations in anything when it comes to security, right? It's like you go find like the biggest, companies and they'll spend the most and the other guys kind of go, just kind of check off. Market driven, right? Can't quite be market driven because look, at the end of the day, like I do not trust capitalism and greed with people. I just don't, right? You can't say like you are in charge here, market, it's a free market, so go make something that's going to be better, but that doesn't necessarily benefit you, but it kind of does. Like whatever, you're going to do something that benefits you. So if we do it for the market, you're only going to see things that are only built and benefit the market. So there's got to be like this kind of mix. And so I kind of like, I'm not calling financial data exchange a perfect example, but I do like it where you have like this kind of this third party standard like that brings all the pieces together, but they're not like, they don't report to anybody. And they're just saying, here, we are here for this community that we're going to create and say, these are the standards we're going to invite everybody to be a part of and then go and push out, because it's not to that party's benefit, whether or not it happens or not, right? As soon as you put, the bias of having something that's market driven is the fact that at the end of the day, this company or these group of companies are going to benefit from something, right? You can't trust for somebody to say, I'm going to do something that will hurt me if it's going to benefit you. Like you have to have an uninterested third party, right? It's like, okay, I don't care if it happens or not. I'm going to do the right thing for the person in the middle. So that's my take on it. And I'll let the rest of the panel jump in.
Okay.
My take on that is a little different because I think that both can work. So there's no doubt that if everything is well done, both can be successful. But historically, what we've seen is that the most successful countries in adopting good open source implementations have been driven by the government. And that is because if you wait for the market to start growing organically, then it may slowly start adding security and stuff. But if you don't add security bolted on from the beginning, from day zero, then you increase your surface attack dramatically. So it has to be really secure from the beginning with identity management. And also anybody who claims to be a fintech company who wants to have data, financial data on behalf of the client needs to be vetted by somebody, because otherwise any scammer would say, hey, I have a fintech data and I have a few customers who want data. Give me the data, right? So you need to make sure that scammers are not getting into that market, that fintech companies are who they say they are. And who is going to vet those companies but somebody who is a third party trusted, and the government is automatically in a perfect position to do that, right? That and setting up standards, like you can grow standards organically, slowly, and adding more features. But if you don't have a minimum set of features that guarantee security, I think that's very difficult to do that organically in a safe manner. So I would bet for a government top-down approach, but I can say from the beginning that both can work. If it's well done, both can work.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with my colleagues. I would say that ultimately the two forces do need to cooperate. In every region where you've seen this work, there's really no getting around the fact that somehow they're going to bump into each other. Even though FDX is sort of staunchly market driven, they're still having to talk to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and figure out what's going on with Dodd-Frank and how is that going to affect their activity. If you look in Europe, there's this misnomer that someone from the government is writing standards or something. That is simply not true. They passed a law, they set some goals, they acted as a catalyst, but at the end of the day, it was market that sat down and actually wrote the API standards that have shown up in Europe underneath that regulatory regime. So at the end of the day, the two forces have to cooperate. I would point to Brazil, an excellent example of the two sides cooperating very well.
Okay.
But at least in Europe, what they've done, all of the governments have been obligated to adopt open banking, whether they like it or not. So that's a very big issue.
I use the word catalyst, but yeah, looks like obligation work too. Absolutely, I think at the end of the day, that there has to be some kind of a mandate that left to their own devices, it's hard sometimes for the market to get on with it. I know that's the case here in Canada. So I think government doesn't have to play a massive role, but one of the roles they should play is to act as that spark.
Okay. So if we're going to distill this, essentially open banking would be the template example of government and industry working together, where we'd have government act as the impetus to this and then have industry kind of run with it. And
exactly.
Okay. So look, let's keep this momentum going and jump to the next question. What's the key to ensuring safety in an open banking system, right? Very high level question, but let me specify. Is it a question of consumer education to ensure that there's diligence and vigilance when you're sharing information as a consumer, not share it with anyone? Or alternatively, is it just a question of a technical concept where we focus on cybersecurity issues like tokenization, encryption, and authentication? Is there an in-between? Probably, but curious to hear from you guys.
Say that APIs play a key role there to make sure that access is secure and the flow, the information flow from the bank to the fintech companies happens securely, and the encryption happens. So if you set up a set of standards that is secure and it makes sense for everybody, that for me is a concept that it's a lot more logical and reasonable than just let anybody do whatever they want. You encrypt it however you want, you like it, and you choose your protocol, be it encrypted or not, and whatever encryption. If you let everybody decide those little details, at the end, you can't make sure that the security is really in place. Whereas if you set it on a set of standards that somebody decides that it's secure and the minimum amount of security that is needed for the system, then you make the attack surface narrower, because there's not so many things to attack. There's only one thing to attack, right? So I think that it's more of a technical issue. Of course, you have to tell the user how to use this securely, but the user at the end of the day doesn't have that many decisions to make, right? You just log into the app and you give your fintech password and things automatically happen. There's a connection to the bank and I can see my financial information. So you have to be careful in who you select, what app you select to use, and not a lot more. I mean, I'd say you have to tell the users that open banking is and what they're exposing themselves when they select to choose an open banking app. But other than that, it's just technical issues and what protocols to use and how to handle financial information securely from the fintech perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I'll let the other David, who for sure knows more about this than I do, give you the details. But I would only add that one of the most important things about open banking, one of the things that makes it work, is that, yeah, the standards differ from region to region, the implementation of an account or transactions, but the security standards are largely gravitating towards a common set of hard grade security standards that you heard the speakers, the two Davids, talk about today, things like SIBA and FAPI, and those continue to evolve. that's what makes open banking possible, that there is this common security base that everyone can draw on and then develop standards on top of.
Yeah, I would say, like, these are always for me as a technologist, right? The problem sets that I love to dive in, because it's not just technology. So I would say this, it's 80% on the technologists, right? We got to make sure that we are adhering to the standards. We got to also make sure, right? And so, participants that are watching this, right? If you are like a developer, you're on that side, right? Take part in some of these standards, right? We can't just sit back and go, okay, the experts somewhere will go around and figure it out. Guess what? That's us, right? That's all of us, right? And there are things that we know that you don't know, or that you know that we don't know. So that's an aspect of it too, right? Not only just on the implementation part, make sure that you're adhering to the standards, but make sure you're taking a part in those, right? If you see things as you're implementing, go, this is way too hard. It shouldn't be this hard. I don't understand what. Hey, that's the perfect time. Give back and get that feedback back so we can make the standard easier, right? So there's that part. The other 20% though, I will say is not. Needs to be user focused, but it's not on the user. We cannot put the impetus on the user, like to understand like what's going on, right? That's not like, I always use this example of a mechanic in a car, right? Mechanics exist because I don't want to understand how my car works. I didn't go to school for that. I went to school to understand how like ones and zeros operate, right? I didn't go to school for mechanical engineering. So that's why there's mechanics. That's why there's doctors. That's why there's specialists, right? So as a user, we got to make sure that, yes, we're letting them know that, hey, here's what's going on here. So you're asking to connect to this bank and do these things, no problem. You're sharing this information with this bank. This is what this means. And you're giving your consent for this amount of time. We do need to make sure that we're baking that in so they're aware of it. But that's about the most onus that should be on the user. Make sure that it's clear and it's usable for them, right? I think that the biggest thing that we are going to struggle with, not only just coming up with the standards, but I think overall in security that we've struggled with is usability, right? But that has to absolutely be a part of this, because a part of that security, although a small part, is the usability of it. Because here's the thing, it can be the most secure system in the world, but if a user can't figure out how to use it, doesn't matter. They're not going to use it. So now I just bypassed all of your great security standards that protect me from everything, because I have no clue what the heck I'm doing, so I'm not going to do it. So what is the user going to do? This is too complicated. I'm just going to text you my username and password. You go do it. Like literally, we know that's what's going to happen. They'll default to something that's easier for something to do. So we need to make sure that usability, that we're bringing that to them, but we're involving the user in it. But the onus, 80% of it has to be on the technical side, on the implementation, and making sure that we're understanding the standards, implementing the standards, and pushing back where we feel they need to change, right? If it's too hard to implement, but let's let our egos go, right? If this is too hard, say it's too hard. That means we need to fix it.
Yeah, the consent to share data should not be viewed as a liability for the user. It should be viewed as an opportunity for them to do cool new things. They should be excited to share their data. Exactly. And that's where the security comes in.
Okay. So David Lee, I should add, you just raised an interesting point with respect to the user experience and how it contributes to security. But I would throw that back to ask you, who is the onus placed on to ensure the user experience, the usability? Is it the provider of the data, or let's say the small fintech that is, the consumer of that data before it passes it on to its client as a service? Who's responsible to make sure that the user experience is top notch?
So I would say whoever's in the position that presents it to the user, right? Okay. So if it's right, and this is we get out of the pass the buck game, or the hot potato, like, well, it's on you, right? Because there's going to be an upstream who's, let's walk through this example. So I'm big XYZ bank, international, all over the world, right? Cool. I'm going to pass my data down to LA, right? And so it's like, now it's like, okay, now he's got the data and says, all right, I've got it. Eyal's got it and says, all right, I've got it. And I'm going to do some cool stuff and then pass it over to one more person, right? Because I've done some stuff with it. That's all I want to do. Now, Sancho, he's got it. He's like, okay, now I'm going to present this to my user, because now I've got all this great data. So now I can have my user be able to automatically update their accounts based on their credit score, something, I don't know, something weird or whatever, but whoever's presented it to the user, I don't care how many times it's gone past, as soon as you present it to the unit, the onus is on you to make sure that you understand that you build something for the user that says, hey, here's this information, here's what we're doing, here's how we got it, here's how we use it. They've got to create that experience, right? Which, if you look at this, right, and if we do it right, which the standards kind of allow that, actually becomes a lot easier for that small on David Sancho's part in that example, because all the data, like, that's all been passed above him. So he's like, okay, I can really focus on customer experience, knowing that I'm following standards to get this data the way I need it here. So I don't have to do a lot of other things that everybody else had to do. I just had to receive the data in a standard specific way. Now I can focus on user experience. So that's where I say the onus is. And I feel like in that model, it should be, it should be less of a burden because because of the standards, you've got more time to focus on.
Okay. So kind of like the liability chain, as in liability is on whoever is the last to kind of hold the hot potato, right, and who's responsible for the breach. The user experience onus also applies here as well. So whoever is customer facing at that point, am I right to understand that they would have the onus to ensure the user experience, which would contribute to more security in the system? Did we get that right?
That's my take on it.
Okay. Anybody else want to chime in before we jump on to the next one?
Yeah, the question of liability, you said the L word, is an interesting one.
Yeah.
Because there's a term that often goes along with it when you're talking about fintechs and open banking, and that's lender of last resort, right? Insurer of last resort. So basically what all that means is in practice, the liability always ends up with the deposit-taking institution, usually the largest certified bank at the end of the chain, because they don't want to lose the customer. And they're the only ones with a phone number who the customer actually knows how to call and get money back from, and who's backed up by all sorts of laws and regulations. A lot of people on the legal side of open banking, on the regulatory side of open banking, will talk about this question of how do you develop a mature liability framework. And when I don't mean a technical framework, I mean a legal framework that allows that liability to be spread a little more evenly. And some banks use that as an excuse to delay adoption of open banking.
Okay. Let's move on to our next question. David Lee, you kind of segued us into this presentation with your previous presentation. And this is a similar topic. Where does identity fit in the hierarchy of security topic? Does it take I hate to use this word, but a backseat to technical requirements? Or is it on par? Is it a foundational building block of open banking on par with security topics?
Yeah, so you asked the identity guide who's going to give the most biased freaking answer ever. Like, look, I will try and be as unbiased as I can, but I'm just going to be honest. Like, it's fundamental to the building block, right? I think what we've seen over the last 10 years, specifically in cybersecurity in general, is what we've understood is that identity is at the core to everything in how we build, right? It's literally at the center of how we build out everything about it. And I say that not just because I've been in it so long, but like truly think about it, right? Let's think about what we're doing, right? So I need to digitally represent a person and give them an account and then access to something. That's literally identity and access management. It all starts right there. And now everything that I'm building around it, right? So it's like this identity has this account, right? And they have access to it. There's these things, there's these attributes of this thing in there. And then I want to provide spokes and APIs for people to come in or people, services, whatever, to come in and access these different things, right? So I need to do the same thing there. What identity is coming in? Is it a service? Is it a third party? What are you trying to access? Okay, how do I make sure that you have the right access? So all this it's these same, fundamentals that continue to represent itself. So as you're looking at this, I would say it definitely is the fundamental building block. So you first start with, okay, how am I authenticating and how am I getting in my identities? And then how am I providing and managing the access to what something is? And it can be really as simple as just mapping everything out and says, okay, I've got these identities, I've got these attributes that I use, I've got this access, this is how I want to manage, and somebody comes and does theirs, there you go, right? So you can't, if everybody's, I'm never 100% right, but I'm like, I would be shocked if somebody would present to me an architecture that says, I'm going to build this thing and never going to manage a single identity or care about how access is managed. And if you're able to build that, sir or ma'am, bless you, and please let me know how you managed to do that, because it's so core to it.
Right, right. Okay, so look, on that point, Eyal and David, before I let you answer, let me rephrase the question a bit. If you're a regulator and you're just getting into this and you're prioritizing where you pay attention to, do you start with identity or would you look at technical standards? Are we like, how would you prioritize that? I guess that's the point here.
So like technical standard is something that goes with a number of different domains. I will point out that typically when you look at different regions adopting open banking, they end up figuring out pretty quickly that there's really 3 domains you're going to have to bring together in some capacity, and they often start separate, and then next thing you know, they're together. The one that we always talk about is standardized APIs. It's sort of the obvious one, the one you could roughly label open banking, right? Standard APIs based on security, etc. The second big domain is payments. So all regions will have some sort of crazy payments thing happening where they're trying to move to real-time payments and regulate that and control that. They will quickly realize that moving money around is a key function of those standardized APIs over in the open banking piece. So they are going to have to figure out how those go together. And then the third big part of that Venn diagram, I actually have a slide somewhere that shows it as a Venn diagram, is identity. Inevitably, once you start moving the money around and realizing you're offering access to accounts, and now wait a minute, this person may need to cross to different parts of the economy, like what we see in Australia under the CDR. Well, now you're sort of stuck. You have to account for some form of verifiable identity just to be able to carry data around. You need a key just to carry data around from healthcare to banking, or from banking to energy. So at some point, inevitably, these regimes will find that the standardized API domain, the payments domain, and indeed the identity domain will end up coming together. And they're going to have to develop technical standards that cover how the 3 of them work together.
Okay, okay. So very much intertwined. Good.
I agree with that completely, because the original question when you said whether identity management takes a backseat to any other consideration, I think that the moment that you start prioritizing things, any of those things like data flow, data at rest, or identity management, you ask for a sacrifice, right? What would you sacrifice if you had to? It's like, I wouldn't, nothing, not at all. This is the whole package. You can't sacrifice any of those 3, because if you have great identity management and great encryption of the data flow, but then encryption at rest doesn't exist, well, you're not doing anything. You're just being ridiculous, right? So you cannot sacrifice any of those 3. So if I had to prioritize, I have to prioritize all 3 or nothing.
Right, right.
That would be my answer.
And I really like that last sentence and everything you gentlemen have mentioned. It really highlights the difficulty in implementing a regime within a jurisdiction, assuming it's regulatory driven, and that you have a lot of competing priorities. I shouldn't say competing, priorities of equal importance that are fundamental to your open banking system. So look, we have about a minute or so left. Really, really quickly, I want to ask this question to each one of you. So give me a fire round type of answer. Going forward, what's the biggest security risk you see stemming from open banking? David, Sancho, let's start with you really quickly.
All right. I think that the attack surface is very, very wide in the fintech side, because whereas banks have been there for lots and lots of time, and they're really experts in handling that data. We've seen fintech companies which started yesterday, and they are like 5-people shops. And there's one of them who knows about IT, and the other 4 are doing something else. So that's the main concern, right? Criminals are going to target them directly. They're not going to target the bank, because they're going to target the weakest link, and the weakest link happens to be them. So that's my main concern.
Okay, okay. Eyal or David, lead.
I'll jump in and just agree. It's another misnomer. People seem to think that it's the open banking standards that are somehow introducing some sort of new attack surface. Nothing could be further from the truth. The open banking standards like FAPI and CBAR are way more secure than what the average bank, even the big ones, have in place today. So there's nothing wrong with the open banking standards, but to David's point, they're going to go after the weakest link. And even if the connection between the fintech and the banks is super secure, which it is if they follow the standards, who knows how they're protecting the data when it gets to them.
Okay, okay. David, lead by process of elimination. You have the last.
Yeah, no. And I gotta, I have to do the easy answer, but no, but seriously, that is the biggest concern to me is is the registration of like these third parties, right? Like what the whole process. How do I go to all of a sudden saying I want to take part in this, right? So it's how does that from a team perspective, like how does that team get built up? How do they accept these protocols? Like how do we, how does each country, whoever, bless them and say, yes, you have met all the standards and you're allowed to participate in this, right? That to me, until we figure that part out, that's the biggest gap and risk that keeps me up at night when I look at all this.
Excellent. So with that, I guess we're out of time. I'd like to thank my fellow panelists for a really lively discussion post-lunch, which is always challenging, but thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you, David Lee from Cloudentity. Thank you, David Sancho from Trend Micro. And thank you, Eyal Sivan from Axway. And with that, I'll pass it back to you, Brian.